judge has dismissed charges against 7 people in the Flint water scandal, including 2 former state health officials blamed for deaths from Legionnaire's disease. The defendants, right here on your screen: JARROD, AGEN, GERALD, AMBROSE, Richard BAIRD, DARNELL, EARLEY, Nick Lyon, Nancy Peeler, and Eden Wells. Judge Elizabeth Kelly took action today, 3 months after the Michigan Supreme Court said a 1-judge grand jury had no authority to issue indictments. All those that you see here have had their charges dismissed. Judge Kelly rejected efforts by the Attorney General's office to just send the cases to Flint District Court and turn them into criminal complaints. That's the typical path to filing felony charges in Michigan. In part of her ruling, Judge Kelly stated, quote, "Here the defendants were not charged by complaint or by a traditional grand jury indictment. Instead, the one person issued an invalid indictment, which was the basis for the issuance of an arrest warrant. Therefore, the charging process was invalid from its inception, and issuance of an arrest warrant following an invalid indictment is irrelevant to our consideration." So how did we get to where we are today? We are breaking it down. In April of 2016, former Attorney General Bill Schuette filed the charges in connection with the water crisis. In December of 2016, former emergency managers Darnell Early and Gerald Ambrose were both indicted on charges stemming from the crisis. In June of 2017, former director of the MDHHS Nick Lyon was charged with involuntary manslaughter, and Dr. Eden Wells, the state's chief medical examiner, was also charged with 2 felonies, including obstruction of justice. Early, Wells, and Ambrose have since had additional charges of involuntary manslaughter filed against them. Moving to August of 2018, Nick Lyons was bound over to trial in Genesee County, and 4 months later, Eden Wells learns she will face a trial. In April of 2019, Special Prosecutor Todd Flood is relieved of his duties by the new Attorney General, Dana Nessel. 2 months later, Nessel announces 51 total charges against a total of 15 former and current state employees have been dismissed. After 9 months of grand jury proceedings and around a year and a half later, new charges were filed in January of 2021. In June of this year, the Michigan Supreme Court said a judge had no authority to serve as a one-man grand jury and issue charges against 9 defendants in the water crisis. Today, Judge Elizabeth Kelly seemingly agreed with the Supreme Court's opinion and ruled that the indictments were invalid and the charging process was void. I talked with Flint water activist Melissa Mays a short time ago. She feels the system failed the city.
It hurts. It's a kick in the stomach, and it seems like the wealthy and government officials have a totally different justice system than the rest of us do. But we in Flint, we're fighters. We don't stop, so we cannot give up. What was done to us was wrong, and what's being done to us is still wrong. So we have to stand together and fight, and we're going to work together to get through this and push in any way that we can. But we can't give up, and we can't just let this be. And nobody sees justice for Flint.
This has been a 7-year battle for the attorneys representing the defendants moments ago. I also talked to Nick Lyon's attorney, Chip Chamberlain, about today's ruling.
Look, in a democracy, there are ways to affect change when you disagree or object to what your officials do. And one of them is to vote them out of office and or pursue other means. But charging them with crimes, at least in this instance, we didn't think was the proper way. We still don't.
What do you say to the people of Flint, or what does Nick Lyon say to the people of Flint after all this is said and done? What's the response to the community?
Well, I think Nick Lyon feels badly for the people of Flint just as much as anybody else. What we as lawyers say, the people of Flint, is the criminal justice system shouldn't be used this way. There was no crime committed, and he shouldn't have been charged.
There's been a rise in lead in Flint's drinking water, but according to state officials, the water is still meeting federal standards right now. EGLE, the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, says the latest testing result is higher than the previous 6-month period, but remains below the federal action level of 15 parts per billion. EGLE attributes this increase to more business sites being included in the testing samples. The 90th percentile in this recent testing was 10 parts per billion. But with omitting the non-residential sites, EGLE says that figure does drop down to 7 parts per billion when you're only looking at the residential samples. Meanwhile, attorneys for defendant Nick Lyon in the Flint water crisis criminal cases filed a motion Monday. Lyon was the director of MDHHS during the Snyder administration. He's charged with 9 counts right now of involuntary manslaughter in connection to the Flint water crisis. His attorneys went to the Michigan Supreme Court in May and argued his case should be dismissed. Well, what is this new motion and what does it mean for these cases? Mid-Michigan Now's Courtney Bennett's been following these and joins us now. And Courtney, what can you tell us about this latest development?
So, Stephanie, these motions come after the Attorney General's office filed a motion to transfer the charges against the 9 defendants in the case to district court. But Britt Cobb, who is one of the attorneys representing Lyon, says that the Attorney General's office, what they're asking for the judge to do is not to follow the decision made by the Michigan Supreme Court. The court said in June that the one-person grand jury could not indict former health director Nick Lyon. The attorneys for Lyon say the Michigan Supreme Court says clearly, and they ordered a dismissal. In addition to the order of dismissal, the attorneys are asking the court to impose a sanction for the costs associated with having to respond to the prosecution's motion.
It's up to Judge Kelly to file the dismissal of the case. And that's really what we're dealing with right now. I mean, in our opinion, this is real easy. This is very obvious what needs to be done here. The case needs to be dismissed by Judge Kelly.
Solicitor General Fadwa Hammoud and Prosecutor Kim Worthy said this in response to the motion, in quotes, "We believe that the Supreme Court's opinion allows for the continuation of these prosecutions, and it is our duty to exhaust all options in pursuit of justice for the people of Flint." It comes as no surprise that the defense's response to us fulfilling our legal and ethical obligations is to resort to seeking sanctions.
Opinion released today by the Michigan Supreme Court is setting the stage to wipe away criminal charges against a former state employee linked to the Flint water crisis, Nick Lyon. He was charged with multiple counts of involuntary manslaughter, but the court, the highest court in the state, says he should not have been indicted the way he was through a one-man grand jury. And the state's highest court also said 2 other people who were working for the state at the time were unfairly denied a preliminary exam in court. The part about the one-man grand jury, though, that sets a precedent since all 9 people in this case, including former Governor Rick Snyder, were charged the same way. The state's highest court today in that unanimous opinion said a judge did not have the power to indict based on a one-man grand jury, saying state laws authorize a judge to investigate, subpoena witnesses, and issue arrest warrants as a one-man grand jury, but they do not authorize the judge to issue indictments. In this case, ex-health chief Nick Lyon and Michigan's former chief medical executive Dr. Eden Wells were both charged with involuntary manslaughter for 9 deaths related to Legionnaire's disease while Flint was using the river as its water source. 6 others were also indicted on various charges. Snyder's former advisor, Rich BAIRD, former senior aide, JARROD AGEN, former Flint emergency managers, Gerald Ambrose and Darnell EARLEY, former Flint Public Works Director, Howard Croft, and Nancy Peeler. She was a state health department manager. Nick Lyon issued this statement in response to that opinion coming today, saying today's decision from the Supreme Court is a victory for public service in Michigan. State employees should not be prosecuted or demonized for just doing their job. It is a great injustice to allow politicians acting in their own interests to sacrifice government servants who are performing their roles in good faith under difficult circumstances. Michigan Solicitor General Fadwa Hammoud, who has been leading this case in the Flint water crisis investigation, released this statement today related to the Michigan Supreme Court's opinion, saying the citizens of Flint should know these cases are not over, and went on to say, our team is prepared to move forward through that process. We relied upon settled law and the well-established prosecutorial tool of the one-man grand jury used for decades to bring forward charges against the 9 defendants in the Flint water crisis. We still believe these charges can and will be proven in court. Now, to be clear, today's opinion by the Michigan Supreme Court in regards to the one-man grand jury only directly impacts Lyon, but it does set a precedent for the 8 other former city and state employees charged in connection to Flint's water crisis.